The sound of shattering glass against Fort Bragg's concrete training yard cut through the August morning heat like a gunshot, sharp enough to make 200 heads turn in perfect unison. "Hey, Princess!" Sergeant Tyler Matthews's voice carried across the crowd with the kind of casual cruelty that came naturally to men who'd never been challenged. His frame towered over the formation, at 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle wrapped in woodland camouflage, dog tags glinting against his chest as he closed the distance to the woman who'd just stumbled. "You think this is some kind of resort where they serve you breakfast in bed?" Kate Sullivan knelt on the hot pavement, her slender fingers moving with peculiar precision as she collected each shard of broken glass. The morning sun caught the natural blonde curls escaping from her high bun, illuminating the freckles scattered across her porcelain skin like constellations. In her fitted light gray t-shirt and worn brown combat boots, she looked like someone's younger sister, who'd wandered onto the wrong movie set, delicate, out of place, hopelessly overmatched. Her hands trembled as she worked, but there was something odd about the tremor, something too rhythmic, too controlled to be simple fear. "I'm sorry, Sergeant." Her voice barely rose above a whisper, blue eyes fixed firmly on the ground. The crowd erupted in laughter, that particular brand of collective mockery that feeds on itself, growing louder with each participant. Someone near the back started a slow clap that died almost immediately, replaced by jeers and wolf whistles. Madison Parker materialized from the crowd like a shark sensing blood in the water. At 5 feet 7, with salon-perfect blonde hair and an Instagram following that exceeded 20,000, she'd spent the entire morning documenting her arrival at Special Forces Assessment and Selection. Now, her phone was already up, camera rolling, her voice pitched perfectly for her followers. "Okay, family, you are not going to believe this. We literally have someone here who thought SFAS was, I don't even know. Maybe she's looking for the spa? Because, honey, this ain't it." The comment counter on her live stream began climbing. 47 viewers became 100, and 12 became 308. Tyler grabbed the back of Kate's collar and hauled her upright with the casual ease of someone lifting a child. At 110 pounds, she might as well have been weightless in his grip. His free hand jabbed toward the mess of glass and water spreading across the concrete. "You've got exactly 30 seconds to clean this up before I have you doing push-ups until your arms fall off. And trust me, sweetheart, that won't take long with those little bird bones." But there was something the 200 spectators didn't notice in their eagerness to witness humiliation. Something in the way Kate's eyes swept the training yard for exactly 2 seconds, cataloging exits, counting personnel, measuring distances, before returning to the broken glass. Something in how her trembling hands never actually fumbled, never cut themselves on the jagged edges, moving with the kind of efficiency that spoke to muscle memory rather than fear. And if anyone had been paying real attention, they might have wondered why a woman supposedly terrified enough to drop a glass would maintain perfect parade rest posture even while kneeling, her spine straight as a rifle barrel, her breathing controlled and steady, despite the abuse raining down on her. In exactly 18 minutes, that gray t-shirt would be torn from her body, in an act of violence that Tyler Matthews would regret for the rest of his life. In 18 minutes, Commander Harrison would recognize something on Kate Sullivan's exposed back that would drain every drop of blood from his weathered face. A symbol that officially didn't exist, a marking that only 7 people on Earth were authorized to bear. And in those same 18 minutes, 200 witnesses would learn the most expensive lesson the United States military could teach. Never, ever judge a warrior by the softness of their voice or the gentleness of their appearance. Because sometimes the most dangerous operator in the compound is the one who looks like they wandered in from a fairy tale, with blonde curls and blue eyes and freckles that made them look 17 instead of 28. Sometimes the deadliest weapon in the arsenal is wrapped in porcelain skin and carried in hands that seem to tremble but never miss their target. They didn't know it yet, but every laugh, every jeer, every moment of casual cruelty was being recorded by more than just Madison's phone. Every second was being analyzed, cataloged, and filed away by the very person they were mocking. And soon, very soon, they would understand that Kate Sullivan's silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. The kind of patience that came from spending 3 years hunting a traitor who'd sold 6 of her brothers to the enemy for cryptocurrency and walked away clean. The kind of patience that lets you endure anything, suffer any humiliation, accept any abuse, as long as it brought you one step closer to the person who needed to pay. But for now, Kate simply nodded, her blonde curls bobbing with the movement, and whispered another quiet apology that was swallowed by the surrounding laughter. She finished collecting the glass, placed the pieces carefully in a nearby trash receptacle, and stood with her hands at her sides, waiting for whatever came next. Because that's what a good soldier did. That's what an operator did. They completed the mission, no matter the cost. And Kate Sullivan's mission was just beginning. If watching Kate endure this public humiliation and blatant injustice makes your blood boil, then you're exactly where you need to be. Take a second right now to smash that like button and subscribe to this channel, because these stories of hidden strength and ultimate vindication matter more than you know. Your support helps me continue bringing you these gripping tales that remind us never to judge a book by its cover. Now let's get back to Fort Bragg, where Kate's silence is about to become everyone's nightmare. The compound at Fort Bragg, recently renamed Fort Liberty but still called Bragg by everyone who mattered, sprawled across North Carolina's flatlands like a small city, dedicated entirely to making soldiers question every life choice that had brought them there. The Special Forces Assessment and Selection Course occupied the Eastern Quadrant, a maze of training facilities, obstacle courses, and Spartan barracks designed to break candidates before they ever saw a green beret. 512 people had started the selection cycle 3 weeks ago. 207 remained. By the end of the week, that number would drop below 100. That's how SFAS worked. Systematic elimination of everyone who couldn't meet the standard, couldn't handle the pressure, couldn't function when their body screamed for rest and their mind begged for mercy. Kate had arrived at 05:15 hours that morning in a Ford F-150 that had more rust than paint, its bed filled with a single worn duffel bag that looked like it had survived a war. She'd parked at the far end of the lot, away from the cluster of pristine trucks and modified Jeeps that announced their owners' prosperity and pride. The walk to the Welcome Center had taken her past groups of candidates, already bonding over shared anxiety and aggressive confidence, their conversations loud with the forced camaraderie of strangers trying to establish pecking order before the games even began. The desk sergeant at check-in had looked at her twice, his weathered face cycling through confusion before settling on poorly concealed skepticism. Kate Sullivan? He'd pronounced it like a question, as if she might have stolen someone else's identity. Says here you're here for SFAS. Yes, Sergeant. You know this is Special Operations Selection, right? Not... He gestured vaguely, unable to find words that wouldn't land him in an equal opportunity complaint. Not the support staff course. Kate had simply nodded, accepted her roster number, 317, and moved to the assembly area where 206 other candidates were already gathered. The stares had started immediately. At 5 feet 2 inches tall with blonde curls that caught the morning light, and a face that belonged in a European fairy tale more than an American military installation, she stood out like a dove in a murder of crows. The fitted gray t-shirt and dark military pants did nothing to disguise her slight build, and the brown combat boots on her feet were so worn the leather had gone soft and pliable, the kind of wear that spoke to either poverty or extensive use. Tyler Matthews had spotted her within 30 seconds. He'd been holding court near the latrine facility, surrounded by a knot of former Rangers and infantry soldiers, who recognized in him the kind of alpha personality that either led or destroyed, depending on circumstance. When his eyes locked on Kate, something predatory flickered across his face. Here was an opportunity, his expression said. Here was someone who would make him look good by comparison, someone so obviously unsuited for this environment that her presence became an insult to everyone who'd earned the right to be there. "Check it out," he'd said to his growing audience, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "Looks like somebody's little sister followed them to work." The laugh that followed was ugly, full of sharp edges. Or maybe she's looking for her Prince Charming. Hate to break it to you, Barbie, but the only thing you're going to find here is misery. Kate had kept walking, her stride neither hurried nor hesitant, moving through the crowd toward the designated formation area. She'd found her spot. Candidates were arranged by roster number, and assumed the position of attention with a precision that was fractionally too perfect, too automatic. heels together at a 45-degree angle. Arms at sides, thumbs along trouser seams. Head and eyes forward, chin parallel to the ground. It was parade rest, executed by someone who'd done it 10,000 times, whose body remembered the position in the same way it remembered how to breathe. But nobody noticed. They were too busy noticing everything else about her. The delicate features, the blonde curls, the way she looked like she should be serving tea at a garden party, instead of standing in the August heat preparing for 5 days of physical and psychological torture. The water glass incident had happened during the mandatory hydration break before morning formation. Candidates were required to drink a full 32 ounces before physical training began, a rule designed to prevent heat casualties in the North Carolina summer. Kate had been drinking from her issued canteen, standing slightly apart from the crowd, when Tyler had shoulder-checked her while passing. Not hard enough to be overtly aggressive, but with enough force to send water sloshing across her shirt and the glass canteen tumbling from her grip to shatter on the concrete, which brought them to now. Kate standing at attention covered in water, Tyler looming over her with the satisfied expression of someone who just established dominance, and Madison Parker narrating the whole thing for her growing audience like it was premium reality television. Captain James Reeves emerged from the cadre office building, his 45 years of service written in the deep lines around his eyes, and the ramrod posture that no amount of civilian life could soften. He'd been running SFAS selection for the past 8 months, and in that time, he'd developed certain opinions about the current state of military affairs. Opinions that were decidedly old school, definitively skeptical about the integration of women into combat roles, and absolutely certain that standards had been lowered to accommodate political correctness rather than military necessity. He took one look at Kate, small, blonde, soaked, surrounded by laughing candidates, and his jaw tightened. This was exactly the kind of social experiment that was going to get people killed in the field. But regulations were regulations. If she'd passed the initial screening, she had the right to attempt selection. She also had the right to fail, which Reeves gave her approximately 3 hours to accomplish. Formation! His voice cracked across the yard like a whip. 207 candidates snapped into neat rows, the laughter dying instantly. Welcome to Day 1 of Special Forces Assessment and Selection. For the next 5 days, we will evaluate your physical fitness, mental resilience, tactical proficiency, and ability to function under sustained duress. Some of you will pass, most of you will not. There is no shame in failure here, only in quitting without giving everything you have. His eyes swept the formation, pausing for just a moment on Kate. The standards are the standards. No one gets special treatment. No one gets a pass. You earn your place here, or you don't belong. The message was clear even if he didn't say her name, and from the way several candidates glanced in Kate's direction, smirking with renewed confidence, the message had been received exactly as intended. What none of them could see was the slight smile that ghosted across Kate Sullivan's lips for exactly half a second before disappearing back into careful neutrality. They thought they knew how this story ended. They thought they understood the script. Pretty girl tries to play soldier. Reality teaches her a harsh lesson. She quits before lunch. It was a narrative they'd all seen before, comfortable in its predictability. They had no idea they were wrong. No idea that Kate Sullivan had lived through things that would give them nightmares. No idea that she'd earned her place in rooms so classified that even confirming their existence was a federal crime. No idea that the trembling they saw in her hands wasn't fear or weakness. It was the permanent reminder of the day she'd pulled 6 dead operators out of an ambush while taking multiple rounds herself. The day her nerves had been damaged by shrapnel and trauma and 18 months of reconstructive surgery. But they would learn. In time, they would all learn. The morning's physical training started with a 6-mile run in full kit, boots, utilities, and a 35-pound ruck. The route wound through the pine forests surrounding the compound, following trails that had broken countless candidates over the years. The pace was deliberately punishing, designed to separate those with genuine endurance from those whose fitness looked better on paper than in practice. Tyler positioned himself near the front of the formation, his long legs eating up ground with the easy confidence of someone who'd run this course 100 times in preparation. He kept glancing back, searching for Kate in the crowd, waiting for her to fall out, to quit, to prove him right. Madison ran in the middle of the pack, her live stream temporarily suspended, but her phone secure in her pocket, already planning the content she'd create about the pretty blonde who couldn't hack it. Kate started near the rear, her position dictated by roster number rather than choice. The pack on her back seemed almost bigger than her torso, the straps cutting into shoulders that looked too delicate to bear the weight. For the first mile, she maintained a steady pace that was neither fast nor slow, her breathing controlled in a pattern that would have been familiar to any combat medic. 4 counts in through the nose, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out through the mouth. It was the rhythm of someone managing stress, controlling heart rate, conserving energy for the long haul. By mile 2, several larger candidates had already fallen behind, their confidence betrayed by lungs that couldn't keep up with ambition. The formation began to stretch, gaps appearing between the leaders and the strugglers. Kate remained in the middle third, her face flushed from exertion, but her pace unchanged. Her feet found the trail with surprising sureness, avoiding roots and rocks with the unconscious awareness of someone who'd spent time moving through rough terrain. Mile 3 brought the first real test, a steep incline that climbed 200 feet over half a mile. Legs burned, hearts hammered, and several candidates' pace slowed to a crawl. Tyler attacked the hill with aggressive determination, his competitive nature demanding he prove his superiority. He crested the top in the lead group, spun around, and started jogging in place while watching the others struggle upward. That's when he saw Kate. She was 2/3 of the way up the incline, still maintaining that same steady rhythm, her small frame somehow keeping pace with men twice her size. Her face showed the strain. She wasn't superhuman, wasn't immune to the burn in her legs or the weight on her back, but she was managing it, processing it, continuing forward despite it. And there was something in her eyes as she climbed, a kind of distance that suggested she'd endured far worse and lived to tell about it. "Come on, princess!" Tyler shouted down the hill, his voice carrying to everyone within 50 yards. "Is that the best you can do? My grandmother moves faster than that." The cruelty was reflexive now, feeding on the attention it generated. Several candidates near him laughed, their own insecurity temporarily forgotten in the joy of watching someone else suffer. Kate's eyes flicked up to Tyler for exactly 1 second. In that moment, something passed across her face that was neither anger nor hurt, but rather a kind of clinical assessment, as if she was measuring him for something he wouldn't like. Then her gaze returned to the trail, and she kept climbing. She crested the hill 53 seconds after Tyler, well within the acceptable range for her weight class and experience level. Her breathing was elevated but controlled, her posture still correct, despite the obvious fatigue. Sergeant First Class Michael Foster, the senior enlisted cadre member supervising the run, made a note on his evaluation tablet. The note read, "Sullivan, smaller frame, maintained pace on elevation. Core strength better than average. Watch this one." Foster had been running SFAS candidates for 6 years. He'd seen thousands of soldiers attempt selection, watched hundreds fail, and observed dozens succeed. He'd developed an eye for the subtle tells that separated pretenders from performers. And something about Kate Sullivan was ringing alarm bells in the back of his mind. Not red flags warning of failure, but rather the kind of cognitive dissonance that came from seeing something that didn't match expected patterns. The way she moved was too efficient, too economical. The way she breathed suggested training beyond basic military fitness. The way she'd assessed that hill before climbing it spoke to tactical thinking rather than simple endurance. But Foster kept his observations to himself. SFAS was about discovery through performance. If Kate had something to prove, the course would reveal it soon enough. The run finished at the 2-hour and 22-minute mark. Tyler came in 7th overall, his time respectable but not impressive. Kate finished 63rd out of 207, solidly middle of the pack, neither standing out nor falling behind. Several candidates had already quit, recognizing in the run's aftermath that 5 more days of this would break them completely. The morning continued with calisthenics, push-ups until arms shook, sit-ups until abs burned, pull-ups until hands bled. Tyler excelled, his upper body strength allowing him to dominate events that rewarded raw power. Madison struggled through the minimums, her Instagram perfect physique proving less functional than aesthetic. Brandon Cole, a former Army weapons specialist with 3 combat deployments, performed competently across all events, his solid competence making him neither a standout nor a concern. Kate completed every exercise at a pace that was methodical and deliberate. Her push-up form was textbook perfect, hands shoulder width, body straight as a board, chest touching the ground with each repetition. But she wasn't the fastest. Her sit-ups were controlled and precise, engaging her core rather than relying on momentum. The pull-ups were where she showed the first real sign of struggle, her smaller frame and lighter weight offering advantages in some areas, but not in raw upper body strength. She completed the required 12 repetitions, but the 12th took her nearly 15 seconds of hanging and straining before she finally pulled her chin above the bar. "Pathetic," Tyler muttered, loud enough for the candidates around him to hear. "Can't even do a dozen pull-ups without looking like she's gonna die." But Foster made another note. Sullivan, perfect form across all events, no cutting corners, struggled on pull-ups but completed required reps. Technique suggests professional training. The mess hall at 1100 hours was a study in hierarchy and social dynamics. The facility could seat 300, arranged in long tables that encouraged candidates to self-segregate by affinity and ambition. Tyler claimed a table near the center with his growing circle of followers, former Rangers, infantry veterans, and the kind of natural athletes who dominated every physical space they'd ever entered. Madison and her group of female candidates took a corner table, their presence tolerated but separate. Brandon and the prior service specialists scattered throughout, forming loose affiliations based on mutual respect and shared experience. Kate took her tray, grilled chicken, rice, vegetables, water, and moved toward an empty table near the far wall. The isolation was both deliberate and automatic. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to observe was from the margins, where you could see everything without being seen. "Hey, princess!" Tyler's voice carried across the mess hall. "Where do you think you're going? We don't allow quitters to eat alone. Come sit with the big boys and girls. Let us give you some pointers." Kate paused, her back to the crowd. For a moment, her shoulders tensed in a way that suggested she was considering her options, running through scenarios, calculating outcomes. Then she turned, her face carefully neutral, and walked toward Tyler's table. "That's better." Tyler gestured magnanimously to an empty chair. "See, we're not mean here. We just believe in maintaining standards. And part of maintaining standards is making sure everyone understands what they're up against." He leaned forward, his expression shifting to something that might have been mistaken for concern if you ignored the smirk pulling at his lips. "So let me ask you something, Kate. Can I call you Kate? What exactly made you think you could handle special operations selection?" Kate set her tray down and remained standing, her hands folded in front of her in a posture that was simultaneously submissive and somehow contained, as if she was holding something back through sheer force of will. "I want to serve, Sergeant." "That's sweet, really touching." Tyler looked around the table, playing to his audience. "But wanting something doesn't make you qualified for it. I want to be an astronaut, but NASA isn't going to put me on the space shuttle just because I asked nicely." The table erupted in laughter. "So let's be real here. You're what, 5'2"? Maybe 100 pounds soaking wet? You struggled with pull-ups this morning. You barely kept up on the run. And we haven't even gotten to the hard parts yet. The land navigation, the SEER training, the combat scenarios. What happens when you're 30 miles into rough terrain, with a 40-pound ruck and someone has to carry you out?" It was a legitimate question wrapped in cruelty, the kind of concern trolling that pretended to be about standards, while really being about exclusion. Kate understood the game because she'd seen it played 1,000 times in 1,000 different contexts. The challenge was never really about capability. It was about whether you would fight back or fold, whether you had the spine to endure not just the physical demands, but the psychological warfare that accompanied them. "I'll finish what I start, Sergeant." Her voice remained quiet, but something in it had shifted, gained a subtle edge that suggested she'd had this conversation before and knew exactly how it ended. "We'll see about that." Tyler stabbed his fork into his chicken with more force than necessary. "We'll definitely see." Kate picked up her tray and moved to another table without asking permission, her departure neither hurried nor apologetic. Behind her, Tyler's group continued their commentary, voices raised just loud enough to ensure she could hear every word. But if she reacted to any of it, she gave no sign. She simply ate her meal with the same methodical efficiency she'd applied to everything else. Fuel for the body, nothing more. What Tyler and his audience didn't notice was the way Kate's eyes tracked every person who entered or left the mess hall. The way she'd positioned herself with clear sightlines to all 3 exits. The way her left hand stayed near her pocket where most people kept their phones, but she kept a small compass and a folded map of the training area, items that shouldn't have been in her possession yet. That suggested pre-planning and reconnaissance. The way she ate with her right hand while her left remained free and ready, a habit ingrained by years of training to never leave yourself completely vulnerable. Sergeant Foster noticed. He'd been watching Kate since the water glass incident, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he knew. And increasingly, he was becoming convinced that Kate Sullivan was not who she appeared to be. The question was whether that made her a security risk or something else entirely. After lunch came the moment that would begin shifting the narrative from mockery to mystery, though none of the candidates would fully understand it until much later. The entire selection class was marched to the armory, a long concrete building with reinforced doors and windows that could double as firing ports if Fort Bragg ever came under attack. Inside, the walls were lined with weapons racks holding M4 carbines, each one tagged and inventoried with the kind of meticulous attention that military supply chains demanded. Master Sergeant Vincent Davis ran the armory with the territorial pride of a man who believed guns were more valuable than people. He was 63 years old, 3 months from retirement, and had exactly 0 patience for candidates who didn't know which end of a rifle the bullets came out of. As he distributed weapons, he provided a running commentary full of warnings about what would happen to anyone who damaged military property. "This is an M4 carbine, semi-automatic 5.56 millimeter, he announced to the assembled candidates. "For those of you who somehow made it this far without learning the basics, I'm going to assume you can at least identify the dangerous end. You will disassemble, clean, and reassemble your assigned weapon. You have 5 minutes. The first person to complete the task correctly receives a 30-minute rest period. Everyone else continues until they finish or time runs out. Failures will be remediated this evening when you should be sleeping." The challenge was straightforward but effective. Weapon maintenance was a fundamental skill, one that separated those with real military experience from those who'd somehow gamed their way through basic training. Most candidates would finish in 4 to 5 minutes. Some would struggle and take the full time. A few would fail entirely and earn themselves extra instruction during what should have been precious sleep hours. Tyler was at the front of the line, his hands confident as he accepted his M4. He'd done this particular drill hundreds of times, in training, in deployment, in competition with other Rangers who prided themselves on speed and precision. He carried his weapon to the designated work area, a long table covered in cleaning mats, and began the disassembly with the kind of flashy competence that came from wanting to be watched. Upper receiver separated from lower, 10 seconds. Bolt carrier group extracted, 8 seconds. Each component laid out in neat rows, another 12 seconds. The cleaning was quick, economical, hitting the critical areas without obsessing over details. Reassembly reversed the process, his muscle memory guiding hands that barely needed to look at what they were doing. His final time, 3 minutes and 41 seconds. Respectable, probably in the top 10. He held his weapon up for Davis to inspect, confident in his performance. Davis checked the weapon with the kind of thoroughness that had kept him alive through 3 wars and 2 decades of peacetime. Acceptable. Take your rest period. Tyler grinned, settling into a folding chair positioned specifically to let him watch the others struggle. Madison was fumbling with her bolt carrier group, unable to remember which way the parts oriented. Brandon was working with methodical slowness, his years of weapons training making him technically proficient, but not particularly fast. One by one, candidates completed the task and received Davis's curt approval or scathing criticism. Then Kate stepped up to the table. She'd been waiting in the middle of the pack, not pushing forward or hanging back, just another candidate in a long line. When Davis handed her the M4, she accepted it with both hands, her grip positioning exactly right. Left hand on the handguard, right hand on the pistol grip, finger nowhere near the trigger. It was the kind of automatic safety that came from extensive training rather than rote memorization. She carried the weapon to the work area, and for just a moment, her hands trembled as they had that morning. The shake was visible, pronounced enough that several candidates nearby noticed and exchanged knowing glances. "Here it comes," their expressions said. "Here's where she falls apart." Kate placed the weapon on the mat, took one slow breath, began. Her hands moved with a precision that was almost mechanical. The takedown pins were released with practiced ease, no fumbling or hesitation. The upper and lower receivers separated cleanly. The charging handle and bolt carrier group came out in a single smooth motion that spoke to countless repetitions. Each part was placed on the mat with exact spacing, the kind of grid pattern that suggested someone who'd been taught by instructors who accepted nothing less than perfection. The cleaning was where things got interesting. While other candidates focused on speed, Kate's attention to detail was almost excessive. She checked the chamber twice, examined the firing pin for wear, inspected the extractor spring tension. It was the kind of inspection that went beyond basic maintenance into the realm of pre-mission checks, the level of thoroughness that operators used when their lives might depend on their weapon functioning perfectly under the worst possible conditions. Reassembly was a reversal of the disassembly, executed with the same precise efficiency. Bolt carrier group seated with a metallic click. Charging handle locked into position. Upper and lower receivers joined and pinned. She performed a functions check, pulling the charging handle, dry firing to test the trigger, checking the safety selector. That was textbook perfect. When she held up the weapon for inspection, Sergeant Foster, who'd been watching from the side, glanced at his stopwatch. His eyebrows rose fractionally. Davis took the M4, his inspection even more thorough than it had been for Tyler. He was looking for any excuse to criticize, any shortcut or corner cut that would validate his skepticism. He found none. The weapon was clean, properly assembled, functionally sound. "Time," Davis asked Foster. 52 seconds, Sergeant." The silence that followed was pronounced enough that even candidates still working on their own weapons paused to look up. 52 seconds wasn't just good. It was exceptional. It was the kind of time that required not just familiarity but genuine expertise, the muscle memory that came from thousands of repetitions under every possible condition. Tyler's grin disappeared. Brandon stopped working entirely, staring at Kate with open confusion. Madison's phone came out, camera already recording, though her live stream had been officially suspended during weapons handling. 52 seconds, Davis repeated, as if saying it again might make it make more sense. He looked at Kate with new eyes, seeing past the blonde curls and delicate features to something else underneath. "Where did you learn to do that?" Kate's response was quiet, her eyes downcast in what might have been modesty, or might have been something else entirely. "Practice, Sergeant." "Practice." Davis handed her weapon back. "Take your rest period." As Kate moved toward the seating area, carrying her M4 with proper muzzle discipline, conversations erupted across the room. Speculation, confusion, suspicion. Tyler sat forward in his chair, no longer smirking, but instead watching Kate with the kind of intensity that suggested he was recalculating assumptions. Foster made another note on his evaluation tablet, this one longer than the previous entries. Sullivan, weapon handling expert level. Time of 52 seconds indicates extensive repetition under training conditions. Movement patterns suggest professional instruction. Background check warranted. In the corner of the armory, Commander Harrison entered through the cadre door, his presence commanding immediate attention from Davis and Foster. He'd been reviewing morning evaluations and had noticed several unusual notes about candidate 317. When Foster showed him the stopwatch reading and explained what had just happened, Harrison's expression shifted from skeptical to intensely curious. "Who is she?" Harrison asked quietly. "Civilian volunteer according to the roster, sir. No prior military service listed." "And you believe that?" Foster met his commander's eyes. "No, sir, I do not." Harrison looked across the room to where Kate sat with her M4 across her lap, her hands folded over the weapon in a position that was neither casual nor threatening, but somehow perfectly balanced between readiness and rest. "Run her prints. Pull her background." I want to know who she really is before the sun sets." What Harrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Kate's background had been carefully scrubbed, her identity rebuilt from the ground up by people with security clearances that exceeded his own. What they would find when they searched for Kate Sullivan would be exactly what she wanted them to find: a paper trail that led nowhere, a history that explained nothing, and a mystery that would only deepen as the hours passed. The afternoon brought land navigation training, the skill that separated those who could think clearly under pressure from those who panicked when taken off the paved roads and dropped into Carolina pine forests with nothing but a map and compass. The training area covered 12 square miles of wilderness, crisscrossed by fire roads and hiking trails, but also containing vast stretches where the only path was the one you made yourself. Each candidate received a topographic map marked with a series of grid coordinates, a military lensatic compass, and 3 hours to locate 6 checkpoints scattered throughout the area. The checkpoints were marked with 3-foot-tall posts, bearing unique identification numbers that candidates had to record as proof of arrival. Getting lost wasn't just inconvenient, it was disqualifying. SFAS had no use for people who couldn't navigate basic terrain. The candidates were released in groups of 10, staggered 5 minutes apart to prevent following. Tyler's group went first, his confidence evident as he studied his map and shot an azimuth with practiced efficiency. Madison's group went third, her nervousness showing in the way she kept adjusting her compass and rechecking her calculations. Kate's group was released 7th, putting her departure at approximately 1300 hours. Early afternoon with plenty of daylight remaining, but warm enough that the forest felt oppressive. The first checkpoint was straightforward, located near a prominent terrain feature, a hilltop with a fire tower that was visible from the starting point. Most candidates would reach it without difficulty, giving them confidence before the real challenges began. Kate reached checkpoint 1 in 22 minutes, recorded the number, and studied her map for the next objective. Checkpoint 2 required crossing a creek and navigating through a section of forest where the trail network broke down into game paths and deadfalls. This was where candidates typically made their first mistakes, either overshooting the target or getting turned around in terrain that looked identical in every direction. Kate approached the challenge differently than most. Instead of taking the most direct route, she followed the creek upstream for 200 meters, before crossing at a point where exposed rocks made the traverse easier. It added distance but saved energy, and kept her feet dry, a consideration that mattered when you still had hours of walking ahead. She was standing at checkpoint 2, recording its number, when she heard voices approaching from the wrong direction. 2 candidates from an earlier group had gotten turned around, and were now arguing about whether they were north or south of their intended position. Kate watched them pass, their disagreement loud enough to carry through the trees, and said nothing. Part of the test was functioning independently, solving your own problems rather than relying on others. Checkpoint 3 was where things got interesting. The grid coordinate placed it in an area of thick undergrowth where visibility dropped to less than 30 feet. Kate approached slowly, moving through the brush with a care that seemed excessive until you realized she was avoiding broken branches and bent saplings, the kind of sign that would mark her passage for anyone following. At the checkpoint post, she paused and knelt, using the moment of rest to truly survey her surroundings. That's when she saw it, a torn piece of map lying in the undergrowth about 10 feet from the post. Someone had dropped it, or perhaps it had been torn from their hands by the grabbing branches. Kate recognized it immediately: the scale, the contour intervals, the military grid system. It was the same map she was carrying, which meant another candidate had passed through here and lost a critical piece of their navigation tool. She could have left it there. The competitive nature of SFAS encouraged candidates to prioritize their own success over helping others. But Kate picked up the scrap, folded it carefully, and placed it in her cargo pocket. Later, she would turn it into the cadre rather than leaving someone to potentially fail because of a torn map. It was a small gesture, the kind of thing that wouldn't earn points or recognition, but it spoke to a value system that prioritized the mission and the team over individual glory. The remaining checkpoints fell in sequence, each one requiring careful attention to terrain features, pace counting, and compass work. Kate's movement through the forest showed peculiar confidence, her path selection avoiding the most obvious routes in favor of approaches that offered better observation and concealment. It was the kind of tactical thinking that went beyond basic navigation into something more sophisticated, the awareness of how to move through hostile terrain where the map was only one tool among many. She returned to the start point at 15:22 hours, her time well within the allowable window. Several candidates were still out in the woods, and 2 had already activated the emergency beacons that signaled they were lost and needed extraction, an automatic failure of the navigation event. Foster checked her recorded checkpoint numbers, verified they were correct, and made yet another note. Sullivan. Completed course in 2 hours 22 minutes. Navigation skills well above average. Movement pattern suggests tactical awareness beyond basic land nav training. Tyler had finished 20 minutes earlier, his competitive nature demanding he prove his superiority. When Kate emerged from the forest, her gray t-shirt damp with sweat and her blonde curls escaping from her bun, he was waiting with renewed commentary. "Look who finally made it. Thought maybe you got lost and decided to quit while no one was watching." Kate handed the torn map piece to Foster. "Found this at checkpoint 3, Sergeant." Another candidate dropped it. The gesture earned a nod from Foster and a confused look from Tyler, who couldn't understand why anyone would help potential competition. But it earned something else too. Respect from the candidates who'd been watching long enough to recognize that Kate consistently acted with integrity, even when no one would reward her for it. The evening formation at 1700 hours was mandatory, a final accountability check before candidates were released for dinner and evening preparation. Commander Harrison appeared personally, his presence unusual enough that the assembled candidates straightened unconsciously, sensing that something significant was happening, even if they didn't yet understand what. "Today was an assessment of your basic capabilities," Harrison announced, his voice carrying across the formation. "Tomorrow we begin the real work. You will be tested in ways that reveal not just your physical capacity, but your mental resilience and tactical thinking. Some of you exceeded expectations today." His eyes moved across the formation, pausing for just a moment on Kate. "Others met the minimums. A few fell short and will be counseled individually this evening." He paused, letting the silence build, then continued. "I want to remind you all why you're here. Special operations is not about being the strongest or the fastest or the most aggressive. It's about being the most effective. It's about completing the mission when everything has gone wrong, when you're tired and hurt and scared, but you still have a job to do. The operators we're looking for are the ones who can function in chaos, who can think clearly under pressure, and who understand that the team matters more than the individual." It was a standard speech, the kind of thing Harrison had delivered dozens of times to dozens of selection classes. But this time, his eyes kept returning to Kate, as if he was speaking directly to her, or about her, or because of something he knew that the others didn't. After formation, Tyler cornered Kate near the barracks entrance, his physical presence deliberately intimidating. "So what's your story, Princess? Rich girl trying to prove something? Trying to collect stories for a memoir? Or are you just one of those delusional types who thinks participation trophies mean you can hang with real warriors?" Kate looked up at him, her blue eyes meeting his for perhaps the first time that day with something approaching directness. When she spoke, her voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it now, a kind of controlled intensity that hadn't been there before. "I'm here for the same reason you are, Sergeant, to serve." "No, you're not." Tyler leaned closer, his voice dropping to something more menacing. "You're here because someone made a political decision to put you here, to check a box, to make some quota. And you know what's going to happen? You're going to quit. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after, but eventually you'll realize you don't belong, and you'll quit. And when you do, I'll be there to watch, because this isn't a game, sweetheart. This is real. And real warriors don't look like you." For a long moment, Kate simply held his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped around him and walked into the barracks without another word, leaving Tyler standing in the doorway feeling strangely dissatisfied with the confrontation. He'd wanted her to cry, to argue, to give him something he could use to justify his certainty that she didn't belong. But she'd given him nothing, except that steady blue gaze that somehow made him feel like he was the one being evaluated, rather than the other way around. Inside the barracks, Kate found her assigned bunk, number 63, in a room that held 200 sleeping racks arranged in neat rows. The space was institutional, utilitarian, designed to house bodies rather than provide comfort. She placed her small duffel on the thin mattress and began unpacking with the same methodical efficiency she'd applied to every other task. Uniforms folded and stacked, boots arranged precisely, personal items stored in the small locker beside her rack. Lieutenant Sarah Bennett, who'd been observing from a position near the latrine facility, made her own notes in a small notebook that wasn't part of any official SFAS documentation. Bennett was 31 years old, 8 years in military police, currently assigned to what the Army called Special Investigations, a euphemism for catching spies, traitors, and other internal threats. She'd been embedded at Fort Bragg for the past 8 months, watching hundreds of candidates cycle through selection, looking for one specific person who'd appeared in intercepted communications, but whose identity remained unknown. And today, for the first time, she'd found a candidate who matched the profile. Exceptional skills deliberately concealed, identity that didn't quite check out, behavior suggesting a mission beyond simply passing selection. Bennett didn't know yet whether Kate Sullivan was a threat or an asset, but she knew enough to keep watching closely. The mess hall dinner was quieter than lunch, fatigue settling over candidates who were beginning to understand just how demanding the next 4 days would be. Kate ate alone again, her tray holding the same balanced meal she'd chosen before. This time, nobody tried to interfere or make her join another table. She'd earned a small measure of space, though whether it was respect or simply exhaustion was difficult to say. After dinner came the evening briefing in the same amphitheater-style classroom where they'd received their initial welcome. Captain Reeves stood at the front, a slide presentation behind him showing tomorrow's schedule. 0530, physical training. 0700, breakfast. 0800, tactical movement drills. 1300 hours, long-range marksmanship qualification. 1800 hours, combat leadership evaluation. Lights out at 2100. Questions? Several candidates raised hands, asking about specific events or equipment requirements. Kate remained still, her attention focused on the presentation, but her mind clearly elsewhere, processing information that went beyond what Reeves was saying. When the briefing ended and candidates filed out into the evening darkness, Foster pulled Harrison aside. "Sir, we have a problem." Kate Sullivan's prints came back flagged. Harrison's expression tightened. "Flagged how?" "Access denied. Whatever database her information is in, it's above my clearance level. I tried calling the Pentagon contact we use for background checks. They told me to stop asking questions and continue with normal evaluation protocols, which tells us exactly nothing and everything at the same time." Harrison watched through the window as Kate walked across the training yard toward the barracks, her silhouette small against the floodlights. If she's that classified, she's either someone we need to worry about or someone who's here for reasons we're not cleared to know. Either way, we keep watching. And we keep quiet. Understood? "Yes, sir." What neither of them knew was that at that exact moment, in an office at Fort Meade, Maryland, an analyst was reviewing the same flag that had appeared when Foster ran Kate's prints. The analyst picked up a secure phone, dialed a number that didn't exist in any directory, and reported, "Phantom Reaper has been pinged. Fort Bragg. Request guidance." The response was immediate. "Continue observation. Do not interfere. She's hunting." Back at Fort Bragg, Kate lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the day's events in the systematic way that years of operational planning had trained her to think. She'd performed well enough to avoid immediate dismissal, but not so well as to blow her cover completely. The weapon disassembly had been a mistake. 52 seconds was too fast, drew too much attention. But it couldn't be helped. 3 years away from regular training meant her skills were rusty in some areas and over-sharp in others, muscle memory betraying her when she should have been holding back. Derek Morrison was here, she knew. She'd seen him briefly during afternoon briefings, a senior instructor, trusted, respected, with access to every aspect of selection. He was the one. The trader who'd sold her team's position for cryptocurrency and walked away clean while 6 operators died into crit. She'd spent 3 years tracking him through encrypted communications and financial records, building a case that could never go to court because the mission itself was classified above top secret. So she'd come here, volunteered for selection under false identity, inserted herself into Morrison's world where she could gather evidence that wasn't protected by operational security restrictions. It was risky, possibly illegal, definitely against every protocol that governed special operations. But Kate had stopped caring about protocols the day they'd handed her 6 folded flags and told her that the men who died under her command had been heroes. Heroes didn't die because someone wanted to make money. Heroes didn't get betrayed by someone wearing the same uniform. And traitors didn't get to retire peacefully while their victims rotted in Arlington National Cemetery. She would endure Tyler's mockery, Madison's live streams, Brandon's skepticism, Reeves's barely concealed contempt. She would complete every event, pass every test, maintain her cover until the moment came to expose Morrison for what he was. And if that meant letting people treat her like she was weak, helpless, unworthy of the uniform she used to wear with pride, then so be it. Kate Sullivan had been declared dead 3 years ago. The woman in this bunk was a ghost, haunting the halls of Fort Bragg with a specific purpose. And ghosts, she'd learned, could be very patient when they had unfinished business. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new opportunities to observe Morrison and gather evidence. The mission was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to accelerate toward the confrontation that Kate had been planning for 3 years. The moment when she would finally look Derek Morrison in the eye and watch him realize that the past had come to collect its due. But tonight, she simply closed her eyes and practiced the breathing exercises that kept nightmares at bay. The 4-count rhythm that had carried her through 18 months of recovery and 3 years of hunting. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 4. Again and again, until sleep came and brought with it dreams of Tikrit, of explosions and gunfire, and 6 operators who would never come home, their blood crying out for justice that only Kate could deliver. The night passed slowly at Fort Bragg, but morning would come soon enough, bringing with it the next phase of selection, and the next step in Kate Sullivan's carefully orchestrated mission of revenge masked as redemption. Day 2 began with the kind of darkness that promised heat later, the pre-dawn air thick with humidity that clung to skin and made breathing feel like work. Kate was already awake when the lights snapped on at 0500 hours, her internal clock calibrated by years of operations that started before sunrise. Around her, candidates groaned and stumbled from their racks, bodies protesting the previous day's abuse. Tyler was up immediately, his competitive nature treating sleep as weakness to be overcome rather than a necessity to be embraced. The morning run was longer, 10 miles with full rucksacks along a route that climbed and descended through terrain designed to break legs and spirits in equal measure. Kate maintained her position in the middle of the pack, her breathing steady despite the weight on her back and the fire building in her legs. At mile 7, several candidates fell out, their bodies simply refusing to continue. Tyler finished in the top 10 again, his time respectable, but no longer noteworthy as the weaker candidates self-selected out of competition. What changed on day 2 was the way people watched Kate. The weapon disassembly time had planted seeds of doubt about who she really was, and now those seeds were beginning to sprout into questions. How did someone so small keep pace with men twice her size? How did hands that trembled manage such precise movements under pressure? The whispers started in the barracks and spread through the mess hall, speculation building like storm clouds on a summer afternoon. Brandon Cole approached her during breakfast, his expression thoughtful rather than hostile. "Where did you serve before this?" His tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than mockery. "I haven't served, Specialist." Kate's response was automatic, the cover story she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. "Right." Brandon didn't sound convinced. "And I'm secretly a astronaut. Look, I don't care what your deal is, but that weapon time yesterday wasn't beginner's luck. That was operator-level skill. So either you're lying about your background or someone trained you really well for reasons they're not sharing." Kate met his eyes, her expression neutral. "Sometimes people just practice more than others expect." "Yeah," Brandon stood, taking his tray. "And sometimes people are exactly who they claim not to be." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Kate to wonder how much he'd guessed and whether it mattered. The afternoon brought the event that would shift everything from speculation to certainty, though none of them understood it yet. Long-range marksmanship qualification at the 800-meter range, a distance where wind, elevation, and shooter skill combined to separate true marksmen from those who'd simply gotten lucky at shorter distances. The course of fire was straightforward. 6 rounds, 6 targets, 20 minutes. Passing required hitting at least 4 targets. Excellence required hitting all 6. Tyler went first, his confidence evident as he settled into the shooting position behind the M4. The first shot kicked up dust 2 feet left of target. He adjusted, fired again, and connected. His final score, 5 hits out of 6, the kind of performance that earned nods of approval from the cadre, and established him as one of the stronger shooters in the class. Madison struggled through 3 hits, her lack of experience with long-range shooting evident in the way she flinched with each shot. Brandon managed 4, solid and workmanlike. One by one, candidates took their turns, most falling somewhere between 3 and 5 hits, a few failing entirely with 0 or 1 connection. When Kate's turn came, Foster handed her the weapon with an expression that suggested he was waiting for something specific. She accepted the M4, checked the chamber out of habit, and moved to the firing line. The tremor in her hands was visible as she settled into position, her small frame somehow fitting the rifle despite the apparent mismatch in size. She took one slow breath, her eyes scanning the range. The wind was gusting from right to left at approximately 8 miles per hour, variable enough to require constant adjustment. The targets were standard silhouettes, human-sized, positioned at 800 meters with enough space between them to require precise aim rather than lucky spraying. Her first shot rang out after 30 seconds of preparation. Center mass hit, clean. The second followed 20 seconds later, compensating for a wind shift that she'd read from the way grass moved between her position and the target. Another hit. The third, fourth, and fifth shots came in measured sequence, each one finding its mark with mechanical precision. For the 6th and final shot, she paused longer, watching the wind flags, feeling the breeze on her face, calculating factors that most shooters couldn't even identify, let alone compensate for. When she fired, the round struck dead center in the target's head box, a shot placement that required not just accuracy, but absolute confidence in one's own capability. 6 shots, 6 hits, 3 center mass, 3 headshots. The kind of performance that made everyone watching stop whatever they were doing and stare. Foster checked the targets through the spotting scope, verified the hits, and made a long note on his evaluation sheet. Harrison, who'd been observing from the range tower, picked up his radio and called someone whose identity would remain classified. "Sir, we need to talk about candidate 317. Whatever she is, she's not what the paperwork says." Tyler stood frozen, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew under the August sun. "That's not possible. Nobody shoots like that without—" He couldn't finish the sentence because finishing it meant admitting that Kate Sullivan was something he'd refused to acknowledge, a trained operator whose skills exceeded his own. Captain Reeves emerged from the observation bunker, his face flushed with a combination of confusion and anger that came from having his worldview challenged. "Sullivan, report to the cadre office after this event. We need to discuss your background." But before Kate could respond, before the moment could crystallize into something official and irreversible, Derek Morrison appeared at the range. He'd been noticeably absent during most of Day 1 and morning of Day 2, his duties as senior instructor keeping him occupied with administrative tasks. Now he approached the firing line with the easy confidence of someone who belonged, someone who'd earned his place through years of service and sacrifice. When his eyes found Kate, something flickered across his face. Not recognition exactly, but a kind of cognitive dissonance, as if he was seeing something that his brain refused to accept. She was supposed to be dead. He'd watched the intelligence reports, seen the casualty assessments, read the after-action reports that confirmed Phantom Reaper had been killed in action during Operation Silent Thunder. Yet here stood someone who moved like her, shot like her, carried herself with that same contained intensity that had made Kate Sullivan one of the most effective operators in Joint Special Operations Command. Their eyes met across the range, and for exactly 2 seconds, The world narrowed to just the two of them. Kate's expression remained neutral, but something in her gaze promised Morrison that his past was catching up with him faster than he'd ever imagined possible. Then the moment passed. Morrison turned and walked away, his stride just slightly faster than it should have been, his shoulders tight with tension that hadn't been there before. Did you catch that detail? The way Kate's hands moved when assembling that weapon wasn't beginner's luck. It was pure muscle memory. If you've ever been underestimated because of how you look, or if you've witnessed someone being judged unfairly, drop a comment below sharing your experience. Did you speak up or stay silent? Your stories matter. The afternoon continued with tactical movement drills, scenario-based exercises where candidates had to navigate simulated combat situations, while cadre members played the role of enemy forces. Kate performed competently, neither standing out nor falling behind, her movements suggesting someone who understood principles of cover and concealment, but wasn't trying to demonstrate expertise. It was a careful balancing act. Maintain the cover story while gathering evidence against Morrison, who was now watching her with the kind of focused attention that confirmed he suspected something. During advanced medical training evaluations, Kate demonstrated proficiency with military-grade trauma care systems, including hemostatic wound dressings and emergency field surgical equipment, specifically designed for special operations medics. The portable diagnostic technology she utilized featured real-time vital sign monitoring capabilities and telemedicine connectivity, enabling remote consultation with surgical specialists, even in austere combat environments. These advanced medical devices, originally developed for battlefield medicine in Afghanistan and Iraq, represented the cutting edge of trauma care technology that had saved countless operator lives in situations where conventional medical facilities were hours or days away. Evening formation brought an announcement that changed the energy of the entire selection. Tomorrow would include hand-to-hand combat evaluations, partner drills designed to test candidates' ability to function in close-quarters confrontations. Tyler's smile when he heard the news was predatory. Here, finally, was an event where his size and strength would give him undeniable advantage, where Kate's skill with weapons would be irrelevant, and her small frame would become the liability he'd always claimed it was. That night, in the barracks, Tyler made sure Kate could hear him talking to his group. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Can't hide behind marksmanship scores when someone's got you in a chokehold. That's when we'll see who really belongs here, and who's been getting by on luck and sympathy. Kate lay in her bunk, listening to the conversation without reacting, her mind already running through scenarios for what would happen tomorrow. She knew Tyler would volunteer to partner with her, knew he'd see it as an opportunity to prove his point about women in special operations. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Kate had spent 6 years training in close-quarters combat under instructors who taught techniques designed not for sport, but for survival. She could kill Tyler Matthews in approximately 4 seconds using nothing but her bare hands, could disable him in half that time, could make it look like an accident if she wanted to. But that wasn't the mission. The mission was Morrison, and Morrison was getting nervous enough to make mistakes. She just had to push him a little harder, create enough pressure that he'd do something stupid, something that would give her the evidence she needed to prove what he'd done. What you're about to witness in the next few minutes will be shared millions of times. Before the big reveal happens, hit that share button and send this to someone who needs to see what happens when bullies finally face the truth. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Day 3 dawned with the same oppressive heat, but the atmosphere had shifted. Candidates who'd survived the first 2 days moved with the confidence of those who'd proven they belonged, while others showed the wear of sustained physical and psychological pressure. The morning's events were routine: physical training, breakfast, equipment maintenance. But everyone was waiting for the afternoon's combat evaluation. At 1400 hours, the entire selection class assembled in the combatives pit, a 40-foot square of padded mats, surrounded by safety barriers and observation stands. Derek Morrison stood at the center, his role as primary combatives instructor putting him in direct contact with every candidate. His eyes kept returning to Kate, watching her with an intensity that went beyond professional evaluation into something more personal, more threatening. Hand-to-hand combat is the ultimate test of a warrior's capability, Morrison announced, his voice carrying to everyone in the facility. When all the technology fails, when the weapons are gone, when it's just you and an enemy who wants to kill you, your training is what keeps you alive. Today we're going to test that training through partner drills. I'll assign partners based on size and weight. We're looking for technique, not just brute force. The lie was obvious to anyone paying attention. Morrison paired candidates deliberately and strategically, matching people who would struggle against each other, creating confrontations that would reveal weaknesses and break confidence. When he reached Kate, his smile was cold. "Sullivan, you'll partner with Matthews. Let's see how that marksmanship translates to close quarters." Tyler's grin was immediate and hungry. "Happy to help with her training, Sergeant." They faced each other in the center of the mat, the size difference almost comical. Tyler stood 6'4", 220 pounds of muscle earned through years of ranger training and competitive athletics. Kate barely reached his shoulder, her 110-pound frame looking like a child's next to his bulk. The crowd pressed closer, phones out despite the prohibition on recording, everyone wanting to witness what they assumed would be a decisive demonstration that Kate didn't belong. "Scenario," Morrison called out. "Attacker grabs defender from behind in a bear hug, lifting them off the ground. Defender must escape and counter within 10 seconds or the drill is failed. Matthews, you're the attacker. Sullivan, let's see what you've got." Tyler moved behind Kate, his arms wrapping around her torso with enough force to lift her completely off the mat. His grip was tight, crushing, designed to immobilize and intimidate. The crowd's laughter started immediately, that familiar sound of collective mockery that had followed Kate since day one. "Can't even touch the ground," someone called out. "This is ridiculous." Tyler leaned close to Kate's ear, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Quit now and save yourself the humiliation. This isn't your world, princess. It never will be." For exactly 3 seconds, Kate went completely limp, her body relaxing in Tyler's grip, in a way that suggested defeat, surrender, the confirmation of every assumption they'd made about her. Tyler's smile widened, victory already tasting sweet on his tongue. Then Kate moved. Her right elbow drove backward into Tyler's solar plexus with precision that came from knowing exactly where to hit and how hard. The blow wasn't designed to cause lasting damage. She wasn't trying to injure him. But it was enough to make his grip loosen reflexively as his diaphragm spasmed. The moment she felt the pressure decrease, Kate dropped her weight, slipping through his arms like water through fingers. Her foot hooked behind his ankle as she spun, using his own momentum against him as she swept his leg. Tyler went down hard, his back hitting the mat with an impact that drove the air from his lungs. Before he could process what had happened, Kate was behind him, one arm wrapped around his throat in a blood choke that was technically perfect, tight enough to restrict blood flow to the brain, but not tight enough to damage the windpipe. It was the kind of hold that made people pass out in seconds if applied correctly, the kind of technique that required extensive training and absolute confidence in one's own skill. The entire sequence took 3.8 seconds from start to finish. The crowd went silent, not the shocked silence of surprise, but the deeper silence of people confronting something that violated their understanding of how the world worked. Tyler lay on the mat, Kate's arm across his throat, his face already beginning to flush as the blood flow to his brain decreased. He tried to twist free, but every movement just tightened the hold, his strength useless against technique that had been perfected through thousands of repetitions. "Release," Morrison ordered, his voice tight with something that might have been anger or fear or recognition. Kate released immediately, stepping back with her hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. Tyler rolled to his side, coughing and gasping, his hand going to his throat where he could already feel the bruise forming. When he looked up at Kate, his eyes held something they hadn't before, genuine fear mixed with confused respect. "Again," Morrison said. "Matthews, you're defending this time. Sullivan attacks." Tyler got to his feet slowly, his confidence shattered, but his pride demanding he prove the first round was a fluke. They reset, facing each other across the mat. When Morrison called start, Tyler dropped into a fighting stance that was textbook perfect. Army combatives, level 3 training on full display. His guard up, his footwork solid. Kate moved like water finding cracks in stone. She didn't attack with force but with precision, her movements economical and devastating. A faint high, strike low. Step inside his reach, where his longer arms became disadvantages rather than advantages. Target the knee that years of parachute jumps had weakened. In 12 seconds, Tyler was on the ground again, this time with Kate controlling his arm in a joint lock that would dislocate his shoulder if she applied another 5 pounds of pressure. "Stop!" Morrison's voice cut through the gathering murmurs. "Sullivan, where did you learn that?" Kate released Tyler's arm and stood, her expression carefully neutral despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Training, Sergeant." "What kind of training produces—" Morrison stopped himself, aware that he was revealing too much interest, too much concern. "Report to my office after this session. We need to verify your background documentation." But Tyler wasn't finished. Humiliated in front of 200 witnesses, his masculine pride demanding satisfaction, he made the decision that would change everything. As Kate walked away from the mat, Tyler grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around with force that was no longer controlled or professional. "You don't get to embarrass me like that." His hand clenched in the collar of her gray t-shirt, pulling her close enough that his breath was hot on her face. "I don't know what your game is, but you're not better than me. You're not—" The fabric tore. The sound was sharp and final, cotton fibers giving way under pressure as Tyler's grip and Kate's attempt to pull free combined to rip the shirt from collar to mid-back. The gray material fell away, exposing pale skin marked with freckles and scars and, covering most of her back between shoulder blades, a tattoo that made everyone who saw it freeze in place. It was a masterwork of military ink, rendered in stark black that stood out against porcelain skin, with the kind of contrast that demanded attention. At the center was a human skull, its empty eye sockets staring with the hollow gaze of death itself. From the skull emerged 6 angel wings, 3 on each side, spreading outward in detailed feathers that must have taken hours under the needle. Each wing bore initials in elegant script: CR, MT, AL, KP, JM, DH. Above the skull, in military stencil font, Phantom Reaper. Below the skull, Tikrit, 2016. At the bottom, a banner with the words, Task Force Black. And surrounding the entire piece, like a border of terrible accounting, 127 small tally marks, each one representing a life taken, an enemy killed, a mission completed. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single person moved. Tyler's hand was still clenched in the torn fabric, but his arm had gone slack, his mind unable to process what his eyes were seeing. Madison's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the floor but still recording, still live streaming to her 4,000 viewers, who were about to witness something that would break the internet. Commander Harrison had been observing from the elevated platform reserved for senior officers. The moment Kate's back was exposed, the moment that tattoo became visible, he went completely still, his face drained of all color, his hand reaching for the railing to steady himself against the implications of what he was seeing. "Holy cow," someone whispered. The words broke the silence like a stone through glass, and suddenly everyone was talking at once, voices overlapping in confusion and speculation and dawning horror, because they recognized the imagery even if they didn't understand all the details. Phantom Reaper was a legend, a ghost story that operators told in whispered conversations during long deployments. The sole survivor of Operation Silent Thunder, a classified mission that had gone catastrophically wrong in Tikrit. The operator who'd fought through an enemy ambush for 17 hours to recover the bodies of 6 teammates, taking multiple rounds herself, suffering injuries that should have been fatal. The warrior who'd been posthumously awarded every medal the United States government could give, whose funeral had been attended by generals and admirals and classified personnel whose names would never appear in public records. Phantom Reaper was dead. Everyone knew that. The reports had been filed, the flag ceremonies completed, the grave marker placed in Arlington with all the others. Except she wasn't dead. She was standing in Fort Bragg's combatives pit with a torn shirt and an exposed tattoo that only one person on Earth was authorized to wear. staring at 200 witnesses who were beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about Kate Sullivan had been a carefully constructed lie. Tyler stumbled backward, his legs unsteady, his hand releasing the torn fabric as if it was burning him. "You're dead. The reports said you died in Tikrit. They told us—" His voice cracked, disbelief and terror warring for dominance. Kate stood perfectly still, her back straight, her chin lifted. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The frightened girl who'd been apologizing and accepting abuse for 3 days disappeared, replaced by something harder, colder, infinitely more dangerous. When she spoke, her voice carried a command authority that made grown men straighten unconsciously. "My name is Master Sergeant Catherine Sullivan, call sign Phantom Reaper. I served with Joint Special Operations Command Task Force Black from 2012 to 2016. We conducted direct action raids against high-value targets in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Our unit doesn't exist in official records. Our missions are classified above top-secret sensitive compartmented information." The crowd pressed closer, phones forgotten, social hierarchy meaningless in the face of what they were witnessing. Harrison descended from the platform, his movements slow and deliberate, and when he reached the mat he came to attention with a precision that made candidates who'd never seen him move realize exactly how much of a warrior he still was despite his age. His right hand snapped to his forehead in a salute that was crisp, perfect, and held with trembling intensity. "Master Sergeant Catherine Sullivan, call sign Phantom Reaper, Task Force Black, 127 confirmed kills, 9 combat deployments, Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts, Distinguished Service Cross." His voice caught. "Ma'am, we all thought you were dead." Kate returned the salute with equal precision, her movement speaking to decades of military bearing that no amount of civilian clothing could disguise. "That was necessary for the investigation, sir." "Investigation?" Harrison held the salute, waiting for Kate to drop hers first as protocol demanded. "Into what?" Kate's gaze swept the crowd until it found Derek Morrison, who'd gone white as chalk and was backing toward the exit. "Into who sold my team to the enemy, into who took cryptocurrency payments from Russian GRU cutouts in exchange for mission planning documents, into who is responsible for the deaths of 6 operators because he wanted money more than he wanted honor." She pointed directly at Morrison, her finger steady despite the hands that still trembled with permanent nerve damage. "Master Sergeant Derek Morrison, you had access to classified mission documents through your position in JSOC Logistics. Between 2015 and 2016, you made $493,000 in untraceable cryptocurrency deposits. And on August 10, 2016, you sold my team's mission package for Operation Silent Thunder to foreign intelligence services for $100,000. Morrison ran. He made it 15 feet before 3 candidates, former Rangers who understood what treason meant, tackled him to the ground. Lieutenant Sarah Bennett appeared from the crowd, her military police credentials finally relevant, her handcuffs already out. "Derek Morrison, you're under arrest for espionage, treason, and conspiracy to commit murder under the Uniform Code of Military Justice." Morrison was screaming as they cuffed him, his voice high and desperate. "I didn't know they'd kill them. They said it was just intelligence gathering, just information. I never meant for anyone to die." Kate walked toward him with slow, deliberate steps, and the crowd parted like she was carrying something contagious. She knelt beside Morrison's prone form, her voice quiet enough that only he and the closest witnesses could hear. "You took money to betray your brothers. You sold 6 lives for cryptocurrency. And then you retired, bought a nice house, and pretended it never happened while their families cried at closed-casket funerals because the bodies were too damaged to be viewed." The comprehensive investigation Kate conducted required access to advanced cybersecurity intelligence platforms and encrypted database systems, featuring military-grade access controls originally designed for counterintelligence operations. These specialized software suites provided deep analysis capabilities for tracking financial transactions, communications patterns, and operational security breaches across multiple classified networks. The forensic digital tools she employed, developed by defense contractors for national security applications, enabled the kind of sophisticated threat detection and evidence gathering that traditional law enforcement systems couldn't match when investigating insider threats to special operations security. She stood, stepping back as military police dragged Morrison away, his protests fading as they transported him to the holding facility where he would await court-martial. The charges were capital offenses. If convicted, he would face life imprisonment or execution. Tyler had collapsed to his knees, his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with either sobs or laughter. It was impossible to tell which. When he finally looked up at Kate, his expression was destroyed, completely broken by the realization of what he'd done. "Ma'am, His voice failed. "I called you princess. I mocked you. I grabbed you. Oh God, what did I do?" Kate looked down at him, her expression softening fractionally. "You didn't know, Sergeant, but you judged anyway. You assumed weakness without evidence. You used your size to intimidate. You let your ego convince you that you were superior to someone you'd never bothered to understand." She paused. "Learn from this. Be better. Because the next time you underestimate someone, they might not be as forgiving as I am." Madison had retrieved her phone, her face streaked with tears, her live stream viewer count now exceeding 15,000 and climbing rapidly. She walked toward Kate on unsteady legs, her voice small and ashamed. "Ma'am, I made fun of you. I called you Barbie. I live-streamed your humiliation to thousands of people. I used you for content, for likes, for—" She couldn't finish. "You learned something today," Kate said quietly. "What matters is what you do with that knowledge. The story you just witnessed is only the beginning. Next week, I'm bringing you an even more incredible tale of a simple woman who walked into a military courtroom and made a 4-star general salute her. If you can't wait to see how that unfolds, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on." The aftermath unfolded over the next 72 hours like a controlled demolition, each consequence calculated and inevitable. Tyler Matthews was reduced in rank from sergeant to specialist, removed from cadre positions, issued a formal letter of reprimand that would follow him for the rest of his career. Madison Parker's Instagram account was suspended for violating terms of service related to harassment. Her video of Kate had gone viral, but not in the way she'd intended. It became a cautionary tale about judging people by appearances, shared millions of times with commentary about respect and humility. Captain Reeves was relieved of his command, his failure to protect an undercover operator from sustained harassment, marking him as unsuited for leadership positions. The investigation into his decisions would continue for months, but his career was effectively over the moment Commander Harrison filed the first report. Brandon Cole approached Kate privately the evening after the revelation. "Ma'am, I served in Iraq in 2015. My convoy was hit by an IED that should have destroyed us. Someone called in an airstrike that saved our lives. Surgical precision. Danger-close support that arrived in under 2 minutes. The pilot said they got coordinates from someone on the ground, someone who painted the target from inside the kill zone." He met her eyes. "Was that you?" Kate was quiet for a long moment. "I don't remember every mission, specialist, but you remember some. I remember the ones where we brought everyone home." She looked away. "And I remember the one where we didn't." The formal ceremony 3 days later was small, restricted to personnel with appropriate security clearances. Commander Harrison presented Kate with 6 shadow boxes, each containing a folded American flag and a photo of one of her fallen teammates. Their names were read aloud: Captain Christopher Reeves, Master Sergeant Michael Torres, Staff Sergeant Aaron Lynch, Sergeant Kevin Palmer, Sergeant First Class Jason Miller, Sergeant Daniel Harper. "They died because someone they trusted betrayed them," Harrison said to the assembled witnesses. "Master Sergeant Sullivan spent 3 years hunting that traitor, when she should have been recovering from injuries that would have retired anyone else. She went undercover, endured abuse and mockery, maintained her cover even when it meant accepting humiliation, all to ensure that the person responsible for her team's deaths would face justice." He turned to Kate. "Ma'am, the Department of Defense is offering you several positions: training instructor, curriculum developer, tactical advisor. Whatever you want, wherever you want it." Kate shook her head. "Respectfully declined, sir. I have unfinished business. Harrison had expected that answer. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, marked with classifications that exceeded his own clearance level. Then this might interest you. Intelligence suggests some of your team members may have survived. Specifically, Phantom 6, Jason Miller. He was reported killed, but intercepts from Vienna suggest otherwise. Kate took the envelope, her hands trembling as they always did. Permanent nerve damage from the day she'd pulled 6 bodies through 17 hours of combat. When do I leave? That's entirely up to you, Master Sergeant. You're officially dead, remember? Which means you can go anywhere, be anyone, do whatever is necessary to bring your people home. 3 weeks later, Kate sat in a cafe in Vienna's old district, dressed in civilian clothes, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, looking like any other tourist enjoying European coffee. Her phone vibrated with an encrypted message. Table 7, blue jacket, don't react. She looked up casually, scanning the cafe with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. At table 7 sat a man in a blue jacket, his back to her, his posture suggesting military training despite the casual setting. When he turned slightly to order from the waiter, Kate's breath caught. Jason Miller, Phantom 6, older, scarred, but unmistakably alive. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. He nodded, stood, and walked out of the cafe. Kate followed at a distance, maintaining surveillance protocols, watching for tails or traps. Vienna's streets were crowded, tourists mixing with locals in the eternal dance of a city that had survived empires and wars and revolutions. Jason led her to an alley 3 blocks from the cafe, empty except for shadows and the smell of garbage. He turned to face her, his expression mixing relief and terror in equal measure. Kate, you're really alive. Could say the same about you. Kate's hand stayed near her pocket, where she kept things civilians didn't carry. To crit wasn't an accident, was it? Phase 1, Jason said. They needed to eliminate Task Force Black, because we were getting too close to something bigger. Morrison was just the inside man. There's an organization, they call it the Syndicate, running operations that make what we did look like amateur hour. They're building something, Kate, something that threatens everything. He pulled a flash drive from his jacket. Everything I've learned is on here. Names, locations, financial records. It's bigger than JSOC, bigger than any single. The gunshot came from a rooftop 200 meters away, the sound suppressed, but not silent. Jason's expression shifted from urgency to surprise, to nothing, as the round took him in the chest. He fell forward, and Kate caught him, lowering him to the ground as blood spread across his blue jacket. It's bigger than Morrison, Jason whispered, his hand pressing the flash drive into Kate's palm. Bigger than you know. They're everywhere. He died without finishing the sentence, his eyes going distant in the way Kate had seen too many times before. She held him for 5 seconds, enough to be certain, then looked up at the rooftop where the shooter had been. A figure in black tactical gear was packing a rifle, movements professional and unhurried. As Kate watched, the shooter paused, turned, and looked directly at her. Even from 200 meters away, Kate could see enough to recognize one detail: blonde hair, like her own, visible beneath the tactical cap. The shooter raised a hand to her ear, speaking into a radio. Kate couldn't hear the words, but she could read the lips. Phantom Reaper confirmed. Engage? A pause while someone responded. Then, negative. Let her come to us. The shooter disappeared over the rooftop. Police sirens were already approaching, Vienna's security apparatus responding to reports of gunfire. Kate pocketed the flash drive, took one last look at Jason's body, and melted into the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd been disappearing for most of her life. As she walked away from the third fallen teammate she'd held in her arms, Kate's mind was already processing implications. An organization bigger than Morrison, a conspiracy that reached beyond JSOC into places she couldn't yet identify. A blonde shooter who looked like her, moved like her, worked with professional precision that suggested training from the same sources. They'd taken 6 of her brothers into crit. They'd just taken the 7th in Vienna. And now they were inviting her to come after them, confident in their ability to handle one damaged operator with trembling hands and too many scars. They were about to learn why 6 operators had chosen to follow Kate Sullivan into the worst missions JSOC had to offer, why she'd earned the call sign Reaper, why survivors of the operations she'd led spoke her name with a mixture of respect and fear. Because Kate Sullivan didn't quit. She didn't negotiate. She didn't forgive. And most importantly, she didn't stop until the mission was complete, and every person who'd wronged her team was held accountable, one way or another. The mission that had started in Tikrit 3 years ago, that had brought her to Fort Bragg in search of Morrison, was now expanding into something larger and infinitely more dangerous. Somewhere in the data Jason had died to give her was the key to understanding who'd really ordered the deaths of Task Force Black. Who'd built an organization powerful enough to penetrate America's most classified units. Who thought they could kill operators and walk away clean. They were wrong, and Kate was going to prove it to them, one bullet, one arrest, one exposed secret at a time, until the entire edifice of their conspiracy came crashing down around them. Because that's what Reapers do. They harvest. They take what's owed. They balance the books between the living and the dead. And Kate Sullivan's accounting was far from finished. Back in her safe house 3 blocks from the Vienna incident, Kate inserted Jason's flash drive into an encrypted laptop that bore no markings, no serial numbers, nothing that could trace back to any government or agency. The screen illuminated her face in the darkness, casting shadows that made her look older than 28, harder than any civilian would believe possible. The files opened slowly, protected by military-grade encryption that Jason had somehow bypassed or been given access to. Financial records appeared first, hundreds of accounts spread across 43 countries, moving money in patterns designed to obscure origin and destination. But Jason had done the work, connecting the dots with red lines that formed a web of corruption, extending from defense contractors to intelligence agencies to private military corporations. Then came the names. Kate's breath caught as she scrolled through the list. 2 senators, a 3-star general, 7 colonels and lieutenant colonels, 12 contractors with security clearances that exceeded her own, and buried in the middle of the document, a name that made her hand freeze on the trackpad. Commander Marcus Harrison, the same Harrison who'd saluted her at Fort Bragg, who'd presented her with shadow boxes containing her teammates' flags, who'd offered her positions and resources and respect. He was listed as Asset Facilitator, North American Operations. Kate closed her eyes, processing the betrayal's full scope. Morrison hadn't been the mastermind. He'd been middle management, a convenient scapegoat to close the investigation, while the real architects continued their work. And she'd walked into Fort Bragg thinking she was hunting the head of the snake, when she'd only found one of its scales. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered without speaking. Master Sergeant Sullivan. The voice was female, cultured, speaking English with an accent Kate couldn't quite place. You've had quite the week. Fort Bragg must have been cathartic, watching Sergeant Morrison face justice for his sins. Who is this? Someone who understands what it means to lose a team. Someone who knows the syndicate destroyed your brothers because Task Force Black was getting too close to our operations in Mosul. Someone who wants to offer you a choice. Kate's hand moved to the pistol holstered beneath her jacket. I don't make deals with people who kill operators. Not a deal, an opportunity. The voice carried a smile Kate couldn't see but could feel. The syndicate has resources beyond anything JSOC can offer. Technology that makes your current equipment look like museum pieces. Intelligence networks that span continents. And we're always recruiting exceptional talent. Your skill set is impressive. 127 confirmed kills. 6 successful solo extractions. 3 years hunting Morrison while recovering from injuries that should have ended your career. You want to recruit me? Kate's laugh was sharp, humorless. After murdering my team? Business, not murder. Your team was investigating a shipment operation we couldn't allow to be disrupted. Morrison was paid to provide their location. The outcome was unfortunate, but necessary. A pause. However, we recognize that created a debt. We're prepared to offer information you want, specifically about Phantom 4, Daniel Harper. He didn't die into crit either. Kate's entire body went rigid. You're lying. Am I? Check the flash drive Jason gave you. Folder marked Vienna Secondary. Harper has been working as a private contractor in Syria. We've been using him for specialized operations because, like you, he's officially dead and therefore deniable. Would you like his current location? His mission assignment? Proof of life? Why would you tell me this? Because you're going to hunt us anyway. You're going to chase every thread, investigate every name on that list, try to dismantle an organization that's existed longer than you've been alive. We'd prefer to direct that energy productively. Join us. Help us manage operations more efficiently, and in exchange, we'll give you what you actually want, the truth about Tikrit and the teammates who survived it. Kate opened the folder. Video files appeared, dated within the last 72 hours. She clicked the first one. The image showed a man in contractor gear, older and harder than she remembered, but unmistakably Daniel Harper. He was alive. After 3 years of mourning, 2 of her 6 teammates were confirmed survivors. You have 24 hours to decide, the voice continued. Meet our representative at Stephansplatz tomorrow at noon. Come armed if it makes you feel better. Come alone or bring an army. Either way, we'll find you. Either way, this conversation will continue. The line went dead. Kate stared at the screen, at Daniel Harper's face frozen in digital capture. The smart move was obvious. Report this to JSOC. Let official channels handle the investigation. Go through proper procedures. But proper procedures had left Morrison in a position to betray 6 operators. Proper procedures had allowed the syndicate to operate for years without detection. Proper procedures had gotten Jason Miller killed in Vienna while she watched. She thought about Tyler Matthews, broken and sobbing after realizing who he'd been mocking. About Madison Parker, whose Instagram empire had crumbled when she learned that content had consequences. About all the people at Fort Bragg who judged her by appearance and learned too late that the most dangerous operators rarely looked the part. The syndicate was making the same mistake. They saw a damaged woman with trembling hands and too many scars, a soldier whose official death made her vulnerable and deniable. They thought they could recruit her with information about teammates and promises of resources. They were wrong. Kate Sullivan had spent 3 years being underestimated, 3 years letting people see weakness while building strength in shadows, 3 years accepting mockery and abuse because the mission required patience more than pride. The syndicate had just invited her into their world, given her access to information and contacts, shown her how their operation functioned. They thought they were recruiting an asset. They'd actually just made their first fatal mistake, because Reapers don't negotiate. They don't compromise. They harvest everything in their path until the accounting is balanced and the dead can finally rest. And Kate Sullivan's harvest was just beginning.